Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Imagine this, it's 1917, and the world is caught in the chaos of World War I. Soldiers are fighting in muddy trenches, giving their lives for their country, and one man, a celebrated general, is leading them with courage and honor. He's a hero, a name everyone trusts to win the war. But what if I told you this same general was hiding a secret so shocking it could have changed history? A forbidden love affair that threatened to destroy everything he stood for. This wasn't just a romance. It was a scandal that shook the military, broke the trust of his soldiers, and left a nation questioning the man they once looked up to. Who was the woman who stole his heart? Why did their love break all the rules of war? And what pushed a man with so much power to risk it all for a few stolen moments of passion? Today, we're diving deep into the trenches of 1917 to uncover a story that's been hidden for decades. Through secret letters, whispered confessions, and long-buried truths, we'll reveal how one general's heart led to a scandal that rocked the foundations of trust. This is a story about human weakness, the power of love to heal and destroy, and the choices we make when the odds are against us. So, grab a cozy spot, hit that subscribe button, and let's uncover the truth behind a general's secret shame. Let's take you back to World War I, a time when the world was falling apart. It was 1914 to 1918, and countries like Britain, France, Germany, and Russia were locked in a brutal fight. Millions of young men left their homes, not knowing if they'd ever return. Trenches stretched across Europe, filled with mud, rats, and the constant fear of death. Soldiers faced gunfire, gas attacks, and disease, living in conditions most of us can't even imagine. Over 16 million people died, and millions more were wounded. The Great War, as it was called, wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a crucible that tested the limits of human endurance, tearing families apart and reshaping entire nations. Boys as young as 15 or 16, their voices barely deepened, lied about their ages to enlist, driven by patriotism, peer pressure, or the naive allure of adventure. They left behind mothers who wept, sweethearts who promised to wait, and villages that would never be the same. The trenches were a living hell, narrow, waterlogged ditches where men stood knee-deep in mud, their boots rotting off their feet. Winter brought freezing cold, summer brought sweltering heat, and the air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, decay, and cordite from endless shelling. Rats, some as big as cats, scurried through the muck, eating whatever they could find, even the rations soldiers clung to for survival. Food was meager, hardtack biscuits, canned bully beef, and tea brewed with water that tasted of chlorine. Disease was rampant. Trench foot turned toes black, and dysentery left men weak and humiliated. Gas attacks were the worst, with clouds of mustard or chlorine gas choking soldiers, burning their lungs, and leaving them gasping for air that wouldn't come. The constant boom of artillery was a grim soundtrack, shaking the ground and nerves alike, while the whistle of a sergeant's order to go over the top sent men scrambling into no man's land, a barren wasteland of barbed wire and craters where death waited in every direction. The war wasn't just a physical battle. It was a psychological gauntlet, breaking spirits as surely as it broke bodies. Soldiers wrote home about the terror of waiting for the next attack, the guilt of surviving when friends fell, and the longing for a life that seemed like a distant dream. Families back home lived in dread, scanning newspapers for casualty lists, praying the postman wouldn't bring a telegram with words no one wanted to read. The war's reach extended beyond the battlefield, touching every corner of society, from the women who worked in munitions factories to the children who collected scrap metal for the war effort. In the middle of this chaos stood General Thomas Harrow, a 45-year-old British officer who was a hero to his men. He wasn't a real person, but his story feels so real because it's built on the emotions and struggles of the time. Harrow was based on the Western Front in France, where some of the worst battles happened, places like the Somme and Ypres, names that sent chills down spines. The Battle of the Somme in 1916 was a slaughter, with over 1 million men killed or wounded in just 5 months. The ground churned into a muddy graveyard where bodies lay unburied for weeks. Ypres, a once charming Belgian town, was reduced to rubble, its fields scarred by shellfire, its name synonymous with suffering. Harrow was known for his sharp mind and steady leadership, always calm under pressure. His soldiers saw him as a father figure, someone who'd guide them through the nightmare of war. But being a general wasn't easy. Every decision Harrow made could mean life or death for thousands. He'd plan attacks, manage supplies, and try to keep his men's spirits up, even when hope was fading. He'd walk through the trenches, talking to his soldiers, saying things like, "We're fighting for our families, our homes. We'll get through this together." These walks were more than routine. They were Harrow's way of showing his men he saw them as more than numbers on a map. He'd crouch beside a shivering private, share a rare cigarette, or listen to a soldier's tale of a girl waiting back home. He remembered their names: Tommy from Manchester, who dreamed of opening a bakery; James from Leeds, who carried a photo of his newborn son. These moments were his way of holding onto humanity, of reminding himself why he fought. But inside, he was carrying a heavy burden. He saw the faces of the young men he sent into battle, knowing many wouldn't come back. In his private journal, he wrote, "Each night, I see their faces, the boys I sent to die. I wonder if I'm doing right by them, by their country." That's the kind of man Harrow was, someone who cared deeply, even if he hid it behind a strong face. His journal was a window into his soul, filled with entries that grew heavier as the war dragged on. He wrote of sleepless nights, of the guilt that gnawed at him when he signed orders for attacks he knew would cost lives. "I sent 200 men to take Hill 60 today," one entry read. "By dusk, half were gone. Their mothers will write to me, and what can I say?" The weight of command was crushing, each decision a gamble with lives he'd come to know. He'd receive letters from grieving families, their words polite but piercing, asking why their son didn't come home. He'd respond with carefully crafted condolences, but each one chipped away at his resolve, leaving him questioning whether he was a leader or a butcher. He'd been married for 20 years to Elizabeth, a kind woman back in England raising their 2 daughters. The war kept them apart, and letters were their only connection, often taking weeks to arrive. Harrow loved his family, but the distance made him feel alone. Elizabeth's letters were a lifeline, filled with stories of their daughters, Emily and Grace, who were 12 and 15, growing up in a world shadowed by war. She wrote of Emily's love for drawing, of Grace's piano lessons, of the roses blooming in their garden despite the gloom of wartime England. But her letters also carried fear of air raids, of food shortages, of the day a telegram might arrive with the worst news. Elizabeth was a pillar of strength, organizing village efforts to support the war, knitting socks for soldiers, and keeping their home a haven for their girls. Yet, she confided in her closest friend that she felt Thomas slipping away, not just in distance but in spirit, as if the war was stealing the man she loved. Harrow was surrounded by soldiers and officers, but no one he could truly open up to. The weight of the war, the loneliness, it all started to wear him down. He'd write to Elizabeth about the battles, but he never told her how much it hurt him. He didn't want her to worry. Instead, he kept it all inside, like a storm he couldn't let out. The war's psychological toll was immense, a silent wound that officers like Harrow were expected to bear without complaint. He'd lie awake in his tent, the distant thud of shells mingling with memories of home, wondering if he was still the man his family loved or if the war had changed him forever. The isolation of command was profound. Other officers maintained a professional distance, and soldiers, while loyal, couldn't be burdened with his doubts. He'd walk alone at night, staring at the stars, searching for a sense of purpose amidst the chaos. That's when Clara Beaumont came into his life. Clara was a 32-year-old nurse working at a field hospital near Harrow's base. Field hospitals were chaotic, tents packed with wounded soldiers, doctors and nurses working day and night to save lives. The canvas walls shook with the wind, the floors were muddy, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood, antiseptic, and fear. Surgeons operated by lantern light, often without enough supplies, while nurses like Clara worked until their hands ached, stitching wounds, cleaning infections, and comforting men who screamed for their mothers. Clara was special. She was kind but tough, with a quiet strength that shone through even in the darkest moments. She'd hold a dying soldier's hand, whisper words of comfort, and move on to the next patient without breaking. To the men in the hospital, she was like an angel, bringing light to a place full of pain. Clara had grown up in a small village in Devon, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress, raised with a deep sense of compassion. She'd trained as a nurse in her 20s, driven by a desire to ease suffering, and when the war broke out, she volunteered without hesitation, leaving behind her family and a quiet life for the chaos of the front. Her days were endless, 12, sometimes 16-hour shifts, her apron stained with blood, her voice hoarse from soothing frightened soldiers. Yet, she carried a warmth that made men feel human again, even as they lay broken. She'd sing softly to calm a delirious patient, her voice a rare moment of peace in the hospital's din. Her fellow nurses admired her resilience, though some envied her ability to stay composed under pressure. Clara's own fears were buried deep. She'd seen too many men die, too many lives slip through her fingers, but she believed her work mattered, that every life she saved was a victory against the war's cruelty. Harrow met her in the spring of 1917, when he visited the hospital to check on his men. He saw her bandaging a soldier's arm, her hands steady even as the man cried out. Something about her caught his eye, not just her beauty, but the way she carried hope in a hopeless place. Her auburn hair was tucked under a nurse's cap, her green eyes tired but kind, her movements precise yet gentle. She spoke to the soldier, a boy no older than 19, telling him he'd see his family soon, even though she knew his wounds were grave. Harrow watched, struck by her ability to offer comfort in a place where it seemed impossible. He felt a pang of something unfamiliar, admiration, yes, but also a longing for connection in a world that had stripped him of it. He started visiting the hospital more often, at first to talk about the soldiers' care, but soon their conversations turned personal. They'd talk late at night, when the hospital was quiet, sharing stories about their lives. Clara told him about her childhood in a small English village, how she'd always wanted to help people, which is why she became a nurse. She spoke of running through fields with her younger brother, of her mother teaching her to sew, of her dream to one day open a small clinic where no one would be turned away. Harrow opened up about his daughters, his fears of failing his men, and the loneliness that weighed on him. He shared memories of reading bedtime stories to Emily and Grace, of promising them he'd be home for Christmas, a promise he'd broken year after year. With Clara, he didn't have to be the perfect general. He could just be Thomas. Their conversations became a sanctuary, a fleeting escape from the war's brutality. They'd sit in a corner of the hospital tent, the flicker of a candle casting shadows, talking about things that felt almost forbidden in wartime: dreams, love, a future beyond the trenches. Clara would laugh at his stories of Grace's stubborn streak, so like her father's, and Harrow would marvel at Clara's courage, her ability to face death every day without losing her kindness. Their connection grew, but it was dangerous. Harrow was married, and military rules forbade relationships between officers and nurses. Plus, Clara was from a working-class background, while Harrow came from wealth. In 1917, that kind of difference was a big deal. The British class system was rigid, and a general, seen as a gentleman of high society, was expected to uphold strict moral standards. A relationship with a working-class nurse was scandalous, not just improper but a betrayal of social order. Military regulations were even stricter, demanding that officers and medical staff maintain professional boundaries to ensure discipline and focus. If anyone found out, it could ruin Harrow's career and Clara's reputation. For Harrow, it meant losing his command, his honor, and the respect of his peers. For Clara, it meant the end of her nursing career and social ostracism in a society that judged women harshly for stepping out of line. The era's gender norms were unforgiving. Women like Clara were expected to be pure, dutiful, and subservient, and any hint of scandal could brand them as outcasts. Still, they couldn't stay away from each other. They started meeting in secret, in empty tents, quiet corners of the hospital, always careful not to be seen. Harrow wrote short, heartfelt letters to Clara, slipping them to her when no one was looking. One read, "In this war, you are the only thing that makes me feel alive. I know this is wrong, but I can't stop." Clara kept every letter, hiding them in her bunk. She wrote back, saying, "You're not just a general to me. You're the man who makes me believe there's still good in the world." Each letter was a risk, a fragile thread tying them together in a world that would tear them apart. Clara would read his words under her blanket, her heart racing with both love and fear, knowing each note could be their undoing. She'd trace his handwriting, memorizing every loop and curve, as if his words could keep her safe from the war's horrors. Their love grew stronger, but it was a ticking time bomb. In the summer of 1917, rumors started spreading. A young officer noticed Harrow visiting the hospital too often. A nurse saw one of his letters fall from Clara's pocket. Whispers turned into suspicions, and soon the wrong people were asking questions. The military was strict about discipline, especially for a general. An affair wasn't just a personal mistake. It was seen as a betrayal of duty, a sign of weakness that could undermine the entire army. If Harrow's men lost trust in him, it could weaken their will to fight. And in a war where morale was everything, that was dangerous. The soldiers relied on their leaders to be unwavering, to put the mission above all else. An affair suggested Harrow's priorities were divided, that he valued his own desires over the lives of his men. The rumors spread through the trenches like a disease, carried by hushed conversations in the mess tents and skeptical glances during drills. Soldiers began to question Harrow's decisions, wondering if his mind was on the battlefield or elsewhere. One private, a lad from Birmingham, muttered to his mates, "If the general's chasing love, who's watching our backs?" The question lingered, eroding the unity that held the unit together. One night, everything fell apart. A senior officer confronted Harrow, saying he'd heard about the affair. Harrow didn't deny it, he couldn't lie anymore. The officer, a stern man who'd served with Harrow for years, looked at him with a mix of disappointment and disgust before reporting it to the high command, and the news spread like wildfire. Soldiers who once saw Harrow as a hero now felt betrayed. They'd trusted him to lead them, to put their lives above everything else, but now they wondered if his heart was with them or with Clara. In the trenches, men whispered, "How can we follow a man who's distracted by love?" Others, hardened by the war, felt a flicker of understanding but couldn't voice it in the face of their comrades' anger. The betrayal cut deep, not because Harrow had loved, but because it felt like he'd chosen something else over them. The scandal reached England, where newspapers got wind of it. Headlines screamed about the general's shame, painting Harrow as a traitor to his country and his family. The press, hungry for stories to distract a weary public, spun tales of a reckless general who'd abandoned his duty for a nurse. Hero or heretic? One headline read, while another called it a stain on the empire. The stories were exaggerated, filled with half-truths, but they fed a public desperate for something to talk about besides casualty lists. Elizabeth, his wife, was heartbroken, reading about her husband's affair in the papers before he could even explain. She sat in their quiet home in Kent, the morning paper trembling in her hands, her daughter's laughter echoing from upstairs, unaware of the storm that had broken their family. Elizabeth had always been the steadfast one, keeping the family together through the war's hardships, but this news shattered her. She'd written to Thomas faithfully, pouring her heart into every letter, and now she felt betrayed not just by him but by the life they'd built. Clara faced her own consequences. She was dismissed from the hospital, her reputation ruined. Nurses weren't supposed to get involved with officers, and she was blamed for tempting a great man. The hospital staff, once her allies, turned their backs, some out of duty, others out of envy or fear of being tainted by association. Clara packed her few belongings, a worn Bible, a photograph of her family, and Harrow's letters, and left France in disgrace, returning to her village where people whispered behind her back. Neighbors who'd once praised her courage now saw her as a fallen woman, their greetings cold, their eyes judgmental. Her mother tried to comfort her, but the village's scorn was relentless, a reminder that women in 1917 were judged by a different standard. Clara's brother, serving in another regiment, wrote her a letter full of anger, ashamed that his sister had brought dishonor to their family. Harrow was called before a military board. He stood tall, admitting his love for Clara but defending his actions. "I've given everything to this war," he said. "Clara was the one thing that kept me human." His voice was firm, but his hands shook slightly, betraying the weight of his choices. But the board didn't care about his feelings. They saw only a breach of conduct, a failure of leadership that could not be forgiven in wartime. They stripped him of his command and sent him back to England, where he faced public shame. The scandal didn't just end his career, it changed how people saw him. The hero was now a man who'd let his heart lead him astray. Old comrades avoided him. Neighbors who once invited him to dinner now crossed the street, and his name became a cautionary tale in military circles. The public's judgment was merciless, fueled by a society that demanded perfection from its heroes, especially in a time of crisis. But was it really that simple? Let's look deeper. Harrow's love for Clara wasn't just a reckless fling. It was born out of the pain and loneliness of war. He was a man carrying the weight of thousands of lives, watching young men die every day. Clara gave him hope, a reason to keep going. She wasn't just a nurse. She was someone who saw the man behind the uniform, who reminded him what it felt like to be alive. Their love was forbidden, but it was real. It wasn't about betraying his men or his country. It was about holding on to something good in a world full of death. Clara, too, was a victim of the time. She was a woman doing her part in the war, saving lives under impossible conditions. Falling in love with Harrow wasn't part of her plan, but it happened because they were two people trying to find light in the darkness. The scandal ruined them both, but it also showed how war tests us in ways we don't expect. It's easy to judge Harrow and Clara, to say they should have been stronger, but think about it. In a war that took so much, wasn't it human to want something to hold on to? The story of Harrow and Clara isn't just about a scandal. It's about what it means to be human. War asks for sacrifice, for loyalty, for honor, but it also takes away the things that make us feel alive. Love, even when it's wrong, can be a way to survive. Harrow's men felt betrayed, but many later admitted they understood. One soldier wrote years later, "The general made a mistake, but he was one of us. He fought for us, bled for us. Maybe he just needed something to fight for himself." Elizabeth, Harrow's wife, eventually forgave him, though their marriage was never the same. She saw the pain in his eyes when he returned home, a broken man who'd lost everything. Clara never recovered her reputation. She lived quietly, working as a seamstress, her days as a nurse over. But she kept Harrow's letters until she died, a reminder of a love that burned bright, even if it burned them both. The scandal faded from the headlines, but it left a mark. It showed that even heroes are human, that even the strongest can falter when their hearts are tested. World War I ended in 1918, and the world tried to move on. Harrow lived out his days in England, a quiet man who rarely spoke of the war or Clara. But those who knew him said he never stopped thinking about her. His story reminds us that war isn't just about battles or strategies. It's about people, their choices, and the things they hold dear. Love, loyalty, honor, sacrifice. They're all part of what makes us human, even when the world tries to take them away. So what can we learn from Harrow and Clara? Their story isn't just a scandal, it's a mirror. It asks us to think about our own choices, about what we do in a moment of weakness. Would we risk everything for love? Would we judge someone who did? War strips away the easy answers, leaving us with the messy truth of being human. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about a general and a nurse. It's about all of us, about the battles we fight inside ourselves. Thanks for sticking with me through this incredible story. If it moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a good tale of history and heart. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories that shape the world. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Harrow's place? Could you forgive him, or was his betrayal too much? Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video.